I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
The Windsor dinner was supposed to end with polite conversation, raised glasses, and another carefully controlled royal evening. Instead, Princess Catherine was fighting back tears. Camilla's voice had cut through the room, and Princess Anne suddenly rose from her chair. What happened next stunned everyone present. Anne did not ask for calm. She did not wait for Charles to intervene. She stopped the dinner completely and turned a private family outburst into a royal reckoning. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles had arranged the private Windsor Castle dinner after weeks of strain, hoping the evening might steady the family before autumn engagements. Windsor Castle, one of the sovereign's residences, served where family matters could be handled away from pressure. But the calm disappeared when Camilla accused Catherine of helping push the Queen aside from an upcoming royal initiative. It landed hard because Catherine had entered determined not to fight. William saw her fingers tighten beneath the table. Anne saw her expression change. Camilla did not stop. She insisted that the princess was benefiting from decisions that made the Queen seem less central. Catherine answered once, quietly, saying she had never tried to exclude anyone. Then came the remark that broke her composure. The Queen consort suggested that the future was already being arranged around William and his wife, leaving no meaningful place for her. Catherine lowered her eyes. William shifted toward her immediately. Anne watched both of them, and the silence hardened. Charles tried to speak, but hesitation betrayed him. The king lifted his hand, began a sentence, then stopped and placed his glass down. That pause mattered, because Catherine was no longer hearing only Camilla's anger. She was feeling the absence of anyone willing to challenge it. William looked ready to answer for her. Anne moved first. Anne pushed her chair back and stood. The Princess Royal, the title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, carried no formal authority over the Queen, but her standing inside the family gave her words enormous force. She told the room the dinner was over. Staff were instructed to end service. Then she turned toward Camilla and said Catherine would not be subjected to another personal attack disguised as a family disagreement. William guided Catherine from the room as she struggled to regain control. Charles remained seated. Camilla said nothing more. Anne stayed behind, and as Catherine disappeared down the Windsor corridor with William beside her, Anne turned back toward her brother, because the tears at that table were only the visible part of a conflict that had been building for months. What made the confrontation so dangerous was not simply who raised her voice. It was who had been sitting around the table when it happened. Catherine carried months of pressure into Windsor. William was already fiercely protective. Camilla felt her position narrowing. Anne had grown tired of watching private resentment spill into royal duties. And Charles, trapped at the center, suddenly faced the possibility that keeping peace with everyone had protected no one at all. Catherine had arrived at the dinner, already carrying more strain than anyone around that table wanted to admit. For weeks, she had focused on keeping family life steady while carefully returning to royal responsibilities. And that mattered, because every public step now carried expectations about the monarchy's future. She had no appetite for another private struggle. Yet Camilla entered the same evening with a different fear. The Queen consort had watched William and his wife become increasingly central to major engagements, and she had begun reading each shift in responsibility as evidence that her own influence was shrinking. William felt the damage the moment he closed the sitting room door behind them. The prince asked Catherine exactly what had been said before Anne ended the dinner, and she answered without raising her voice. Then she asked him not to go back downstairs angry. That request cut deeper than the accusation itself. He was furious because even after being reduced to tears, her first instinct was still to stop the family from breaking apart. Catherine repeated that she wanted no confrontation, but he could hear how much effort it took for her to remain composed. Anne carried a different kind of anger. The Princess Royal had seen family disagreements before, but she did not believe what happened at the table belonged in that category anymore. Catherine had been cornered in a setting where she should have felt safe, and the older royal believed humiliation had crossed the line into something far more serious. When she found Charles alone after the others had left, she asked him one direct question. Had Camilla complained before about Catherine becoming too prominent? Charles did not answer quickly enough. The king finally admitted that similar concerns had been raised in earlier private conversations, though never with the force displayed that night. His hesitation told Anne more than his words. He had known resentment existed. He had simply believed it would fade. William then learned something that changed the shape of the accusation completely. An upcoming royal program had been revised several days earlier, shifting key engagements toward him and Catherine. But she had not ordered those changes. The decisions had moved through household planning channels without her personal instruction. Anne immediately saw the danger. If Catherine had been blamed for a decision she never made, then someone had allowed a false impression to grow unchecked. And that trail led back 3 weeks, to one planning meeting, one badly handled conversation, and the moment Camilla first became convinced she was being pushed aside. The outburst did not begin at the Windsor dinner. Its real beginning came 3 weeks earlier, behind a closed door, during what should have been an ordinary discussion about royal engagements. One revised schedule, one misunderstood decision, one comment about the monarchy's future. By the time Camilla walked out of that meeting, she believed Catherine was helping design a royal structure that would eventually push her aside, and no one corrected that belief before resentment hardened into something far more dangerous. Camilla entered the Windsor planning meeting expecting routine adjustments, not a warning about her place in the family. The Queen Consort listened as senior roles were redistributed across a major series of national engagements, with William and Catherine given greater responsibility because the program was designed around the monarchy's next generation. A royal engagement simply means an official public duty, carried out on behalf of the crown. And these particular appearances mattered, because they would place the prince and his wife at the center of several highly visible events. Charles knew about the changes. Catherine had not demanded them. Camilla felt the shift immediately. Several appearances she had expected to attend were reassigned to William and his wife, yet the explanation reached her in fragments. She asked whether the palace had already started moving on. A senior aide, trying to explain long-term planning, answered that the institution had to prepare for what comes next. The words were clumsy. Their effect was devastating. She heard them not as logistics, but as confirmation that her role was slowly being reduced. Catherine tried to stop the misunderstanding later that same day. The princess spoke with Camilla privately and said she had neither requested nor engineered the changes. She explained that the schedule had been shaped around workload, continuity, and future responsibility. But calmness only deepened the Queen's frustration. Camilla believed Catherine was refusing to admit how much influence she already carried, simply by standing beside the future king. Catherine left the conversation unsettled, while the older woman left convinced that something important was being hidden behind polite language. Anne reacted differently when she heard what had happened. The Princess Royal confronted Charles that afternoon and warned him that an administrative dispute had become personal. She told her brother that bringing everyone together socially before the resentment was resolved would be a mistake. Charles disagreed. The king believed an informal dinner could lower the temperature and remind everyone that family still existed beneath duty. Anne did not like the plan, but she agreed to attend. She feared leaving Catherine, William, Camilla, and Charles alone with anger that nobody had properly named. That decision placed her at the table when the resentment finally broke loose. The dinner, therefore, did not create the crisis. It merely removed the final layer of restraint. And once that restraint vanished, Anne was forced to decide whether family loyalty meant remaining silent or finally drawing a line. Anne had tolerated strained dinners before. She had watched sharp comments disappear beneath royal smiles and seen uncomfortable moments buried for the sake of appearances. But this was different. Catherine was crying, William was seconds away from responding, and Charles looked momentarily unable to regain control of his own table. Anne understood that if nobody acted, the argument would become uglier. So she stood, and with one sentence, the Princess Royal changed the balance of the room. Camilla pushed the accusation further. The Queen Consort said Catherine had allowed people around William to reduce her role, while still presenting an image of family unity. Catherine answered that she had never tried to remove anyone, and had never asked for the disputed engagements. But the argument was no longer about schedules. It had become personal, and that mattered because the people around the table were not simply colleagues dividing public duties. They were a family, already carrying years of resentment, pressure, and unresolved fear. Catherine felt the final remark land hard. Camilla questioned whether she truly understood what years of waiting beside a future king could do to someone, and the implication was unmistakable. The princess looked down, her eyes filled. William turned toward the Queen immediately, his restraint breaking at last. He began defending his wife, but Anne raised one hand toward him before his anger could take control. The gesture was not meant to silence him. It was meant to stop the room from crossing a line none of them could easily return from. Anne stepped away from her chair and faced Camilla directly. The Princess Royal is a title traditionally given to the monarch's eldest daughter, and while it gives her no formal power over the Queen, her seniority and closeness to Charles carry enormous personal weight. She told Camilla that disagreement was one thing, but humiliating Catherine in front of the family was another. The Queen pushed her own chair back and insisted she had only been defending her position. Anne refused to soften. She told staff to end service immediately and made clear that Catherine was free to leave without another word. Then she turned toward Charles. The king had remained almost silent through the worst of the confrontation, and she warned him quietly that the family could not keep calling these moments misunderstandings when the same wounds were reopening again and again. Charles heard the warning. He did not argue. Catherine left with William beside her. Camilla remained tense and defensive. Anne stayed near her brother until the room finally emptied. Then Charles made his first decisive move of the night. He asked for the revised engagement schedule and the notes from the earlier Windsor planning meeting. Anne had stopped the dinner. Now Charles needed to discover whether the accusation that shattered it had any truth behind it, and the answer would determine who actually held the power to end the conflict. The loudest moment of the night was over. The more consequential one happened afterward, when Charles sat with the paperwork nobody had expected to matter. Names, engagements, revised responsibilities. Notes from a meeting that had seemed routine until Catherine left dinner in tears. The king now faced an uncomfortable possibility. Camilla had built her anger around a decision Catherine never made. And if that was true, Charles's own reluctance to intervene earlier had allowed the misunderstanding to become personal. Charles read the revised program slowly. The document confirmed that the redistribution of royal engagements had been approved through his own household after discussions with William's team. A royal household is the group of staff and advisors who support a senior royal's official work. And that mattered because the changes had moved through formal planning channels rather than through Catherine personally. William had been involved because, as heir, he was increasingly preparing his team for greater responsibility. But he had not stripped Camilla of her standing, and his wife had not removed the Queen from anything. Charles reached Catherine's name and stopped. The king closed the folder and remained silent for several seconds. The truth was now impossible to avoid. She had sat at his table and absorbed an accusation rooted in decisions approved under his own authority. That knowledge brought guilt with it, because he had heard Camilla's concerns before and had chosen patience over confrontation. He had believed resentment would fade. Instead, it had found a target. Anne entered without aids and went directly to the point. The Princess Royal told her brother that avoiding conflict was still a choice when someone else repeatedly paid the emotional price. Charles resisted at first. He said he had been trying to preserve family peace, not ignore the problem. But she pushed harder, reminding him that Catherine had left the table in tears, while everyone else had been given months to express their frustration. Finally, he admitted he had hoped time would cool the tension. The missing explanation made everything worse. Charles discovered that a briefing prepared for Camilla had described the engagement changes without clearly stating that he had approved them. The omission had allowed the Queen Consort to believe William and Catherine were driving the shift alone. It did not excuse the outburst, but it explained how suspicion had hardened into certainty. Charles made a decision. From that point forward, disputes over royal roles would come directly to him before they reached family conversations. No more competing interpretations. No more resentment passed between households. And before another private gathering took place, Camilla would have to speak directly to Catherine. Anne approved the boundary, but she did not leave Windsor. When Camilla learned that the king's sister was staying specifically to make sure the incident was not quietly buried, the humiliation deepened. For her, losing control at dinner had been painful. Realizing Anne intended to make that night a permanent line inside the family was harder still. Mourning did not soften what had happened. Windsor woke to the same family, the same rooms, and an entirely different balance between them. Catherine had withdrawn from the next private gathering. William was no longer willing to treat the episode as a passing argument. Camilla discovered that Anne had stayed overnight. And Charles, carrying the weight of his own silence, prepared to tell his wife something she had resisted hearing for months. Catherine had not caused the decision that triggered her anger. Catherine stayed away from the small family breakfast and remained privately with William. She was not trying to punish anyone. She simply could not return immediately to the same atmosphere that had left her shaken only hours earlier. That mattered, because the breakfast had been intended as a quiet attempt to restore normality before the family returned to official duties. Instead, her absence made the damage impossible to ignore. William found her sitting with untouched tea and asked what hurt most. She answered quietly, not the raised voice, but realizing someone inside the family truly believed she was secretly trying to push them aside. Anne had stayed at Windsor for exactly that reason. The Princess Royal remained because Charles had asked her to join the morning conversation, and her presence sent a clear message that the incident would not be dismissed as another private disagreement. A family gathering has no constitutional force, meaning it creates no formal legal decision for the monarchy. But what happened there still carried enormous personal consequences. Anne believed those consequences had to be faced before everyone simply returned to their schedules. Charles approached Camilla with the revised program in mind. The king told his wife directly that Catherine had not authorized the disputed changes. She pushed back at first, arguing that influence did not require a signature and that the princess benefited from every shift toward William. Then he revealed the part she had not expected. He had personally supported the revised arrangement. Camilla fell quieter. The accusation she had carried into dinner had suddenly lost its foundation. Charles did not stop there. He told the Queen Consort that future concerns involving William or Catherine would come directly to him before reaching a family confrontation. The boundary was personal rather than constitutional, but its meaning was unmistakable. He would no longer allow household frustration to travel unchecked until it exploded across a dinner table. Anne wanted more. She told her brother that procedure could prevent another argument, but it could not repair what Catherine had already endured. In her view, the princess deserved a direct acknowledgement that the dinner had crossed a line. Camilla resisted, then finally agreed. She made one condition. Nobody else would be present when she spoke to Catherine. The shouting had happened before witnesses. The next turning point would happen without any, when two women carrying very different fears finally sat down alone. No staff stood between them. No husbands answered for them. Anne was not there to intervene, and Charles could not soften the words. Catherine and Camilla entered the room carrying the weight of an argument that had become bigger than either woman intended. One had been humiliated. The other believed she was being erased. For the first time since the Windsor dinner, neither could hide behind royal structure. What followed was quieter than the outburst, and far more important. Catherine entered the small Windsor sitting room, knowing William was waiting elsewhere. Camilla had made the same request of Charles. Neither woman wanted aides, secretaries, or carefully prepared notes between them. That mattered because the earlier conflict had grown partly through interpretation. Who meant what? Who approved what? Who was supposedly gaining influence? Now there would be no institutional buffer. A private royal meeting simply meant the conversation belonged to the people inside it, not to staff shaping official language around them. Camilla spoke first. The Queen Consort admitted that watching William and his wife become more central had stirred a fear she rarely allowed herself to say aloud. She had spent years fighting for acceptance, enduring scrutiny, and eventually reaching a place beside the king. Now every shift toward the next generation felt, to her, like a warning that all of that could disappear almost overnight. Catherine listened without interrupting. The princess understood the fear, but she also understood what that fear had cost her. Catherine answered with controlled firmness. She told Camilla that fear did not justify making someone else carry it. She described the dinner as humiliating, not because voices had risen, but because her motives had been questioned in front of the family. Then she mentioned her children. She said they should never grow up believing their mother's public duty could be reduced to ambition simply because her role was becoming more visible. Camilla lowered her defense. The words landed because they moved the argument away from rank and towards something deeply personal. Camilla finally admitted what Charles's review had already exposed. She had directed anger at Catherine for decisions the princess had not made. She apologized for the accusation and, more importantly, for continuing after it became clear Catherine was distressed. There was no dramatic embrace, no sudden warmth. Catherine accepted the apology, but told her trust would return through behavior, not through one private conversation. Camilla agreed. That was the turning point. When Catherine left the room, Anne was waiting farther down the corridor. The Princess Royal looked at her face and immediately understood that something had shifted. But before she could ask what had been said, another problem arrived. Word of the halted Windsor dinner had begun escaping the castle. Inside the family, the voices had finally lowered. Outside the gates, however, the story was about to become louder than any of them could control. By the time the royal household found a fragile private balance, the outside world had already chosen its image of the crisis. Anne standing up, Catherine in tears, and a dinner abruptly ending behind Windsor's walls. The details spread faster than the palace could contain them. Broadcasters debated loyalty. Commentators examined every recent appearance. And outside Windsor Castle itself, one simple handmade sign captured the public mood more powerfully than pages of analysis. Protect Catherine. Respect Anne. Catherine became the emotional center almost immediately. Coverage focused less on the scheduling dispute and more on the fact that the princess had been reduced to tears during what should have been a private family evening. That mattered because the public had long viewed royal unity through carefully controlled appearances, and this story shattered that image from the inside. William stayed close to his wife during their next engagement and refused to address the controversy. The prince said nothing, but his restraint only intensified the attention around them. Camilla faced a different kind of pressure. The Queen Consort appeared alongside Charles at a previously scheduled engagement, knowing that every pause, expression, and exchange would be read through the Windsor confrontation. The king kept the appearance calm and professional. Neither mentioned the dinner. The royal household, the staff structure that supports official duties and communications, released only a limited response, confirming that planned engagements remained unchanged. The message was clear. The family had suffered a personal rupture, not a constitutional crisis. Anne chose silence. The Princess Royal refused to explain her intervention publicly and declined to turn the dinner into a personal defense of Catherine or an attack on Camilla. That decision gave the moment even more weight. Without an interview, recorded statement, or palace briefing from her, the public was left with the simple fact that she had stood up when the argument crossed a line. Her silence made the action feel instinctive, rather than calculated. Then one public moment captured everything. A small crowd gathered near the public approach outside Windsor Castle. Among them, one visitor held a handwritten sign carrying 4 words: "Protect Catherine. Respect Anne." Television cameras caught it. Broadcasters repeated it. Within hours, the phrase became shorthand for the emotional judgment forming around the country. Catherine was seen as wounded. Anne was seen as the person who acted. Camilla was left facing the harshest scrutiny. Charles understood what that meant. The king knew the family could not erase the dinner, control every interpretation, or force the public to forget Catherine's tears. All he could control was what happened next. The public had already delivered its emotional judgment. The final verdict, however, belonged inside the family, where Charles, Anne, Camilla, William, and Catherine had to decide what would never be allowed to happen again. In the end, the significance of the Windsor dinner was not that a royal lost her temper or that another royal cried. Families argue. Powerful families can argue brutally. What made this night different was the moment someone finally refused to disguise harm as tradition, tension, or misunderstanding. Anne stopped the dinner because Catherine had reached her limit. Charles accepted that silence had failed. Camilla confronted the fear beneath her anger. And Catherine proved that forgiveness did not require surrendering her boundaries. Charles acted first, once the immediate crisis had settled. The king made clear that future disputes involving official responsibilities would be handled through direct private conversations before they reached family gatherings. That mattered, because the original conflict had grown through silence, incomplete explanations, and assumptions passed between households. He was not creating a constitutional rule, meaning no law or formal royal power had changed. He was creating a family boundary. No more resentment would be carried quietly into personal rooms and then allowed to explode. Catherine returned to her duties with William beside her, but privately, she admitted something harder. The princess told him she wished the Windsor dinner had never happened, yet she did not regret walking away when she did. He answered that she should never have been expected to endure humiliation simply because royal life often rewarded restraint. William had wanted to defend her with anger. Now he understood that protecting her also meant respecting the boundary she had chosen for herself. Camilla faced Charles with far less certainty than before. The Queen Consort acknowledged that fear of losing influence had caused her to see hostility inside changes that were not designed as attacks. He did not shame her, but he told her plainly that fear could explain an outburst without excusing it. She accepted that distinction, just as Catherine had accepted the apology without pretending trust had instantly returned. Anne gave the night its final meaning in a private conversation with her brother. The Princess Royal told Charles that stopping the dinner had never been about choosing Catherine over Camilla. It had been about ending an old instinct inside powerful families, the habit of protecting appearances while the wounded person carried the cost in silence. He listened differently this time. There was no defense left to make. The family moved forward, but not by pretending nothing had happened. Catherine accepted the boundary. Camilla respected it. William stepped back from confrontation. Charles accepted responsibility for acting sooner. Anne, having forced the crisis into the open, no longer needed to stand at its center. That was the real verdict. The Windsor dinner became a turning point because endurance alone was no longer treated as dignity. Catherine's tears exposed the damage. Camilla's apology acknowledged it. Charles's response contained it. Anne's refusal to remain seated ended it. She stopped one dinner, but what she truly interrupted was something far older: the instinct to preserve royal peace at any emotional cost. That night, Windsor chose a different rule. Family harmony would no longer mean asking the wounded person to stay silent.
Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.